Hello everyone, this is Shayna from YumiYarns.com, and today I thought we would try doing a knit with me. These are the Traveler socks. It's a new pattern that I released this month, and we will be using these beautiful yarns. It's a mini skein set from Elaine Yarns, and the colors were based off Kyle Moore Abbey. She does all of her yarns and like her colorways and her mini skein sets are all based off of places that she's visited, and these are actually photos that she's taken to draw inspiration from the set. I've got 5 colorways here, and I just kind of wanted to show you how I kind of played around with the colors. I knew I wanted to do every other grays and greens with the brightest green for the heels, toes, and cuffs. But I kind of just lumped them together and played around with the positions of the different colors until I was happy with the lineup that I had. So I'm going to start at the cuff with this pair with the bright green, and then transition to a gray for the leg, and then another one of the greens, and then a gray, and then a green, and then a gray, and kind of stripe the colorways throughout the pattern. Right here I'm showing you how you can easily do a quick slip knot if you need, because I know a lot of people like to start, especially on DPNs, with a slip knot, so you can start your socks that way. Otherwise, I'm going to show you here my preferred method, which is actually just kind of twisting the yarn around the needle. For your first stitch there, that's what replaces the slip knot, so you don't get a little bump. And now I'm doing a German twisted cast on for my stitches because I like how stretchy it is for the cuffs. I'm making an adult size sock that will fit me. You obviously can make whichever size you would like to make. This particular pattern has, I believe, 4 sizes from kids through adults, and it is also a little bit stretchy, so even though it's 4 sizes listed, since it's a sock, you can kind of customize the fit by changing the length of the foot and the leg, so you can make it to fit your needs. And this is kind of a fun pattern. I love Stephanie's mini skein sets because she does such a beautiful job with the photography, and the colors that she dyes the yarns to go with the pictures are always so pretty and inspiring, and it just makes me happy to see the color combos that she pulls out of the places that she's visited. And so I was really inspired to do kind of a fun stripy pair of socks with this set. And here you'll see I'm adding in my second DPN, and I wanted to show this part where I'm not exactly the most fluid at adding in the next needle, because it can be really frustrating, especially if you're a newer sock knitter. Even me, who I think I've been knitting socks for it's been a long time now. I think almost 14 years I've been knitting socks, and I still struggle with adding in the next DPN when I'm doing the cast-ons. But once you get going, you just kind of keep going the same way you did the first needle, and then the rest of the needles just get added in, kind of like you did this one, and you just kind of keep stacking them up side by side almost, so the stitches all kind of keep going in a line until you're all done and have all of your stitches. I'm using 5 DPNs, which are double pointed needles total for mine, so I'm going to have all my stitches spread out over 4 needles. I believe I'm using a 60 stitch cast on, so that means each needle is going to have 15 stitches on it. And now you can kind of see how there's that lineup of all the stitches, and it makes it easy when you're lining it up and putting it so that you're working in the round, which is what I'm doing here. I like to use a locking stitch marker to mark my beginning of round, I just clip it right onto my working yarn and put it in between the 2 needles at the beginning of the round there, and it'll just sit there. It won't continue up the sock with you like when you put the marker on the needle itself. But because you know that the place where those 2 needles intersect is the beginning of round, you don't actually need it to follow you up the sock, because you know anytime those 2 needles are crossing each other, that's your beginning of round. And I'm just kind of showing you guys here how I weave in ends as I go. My very first stitch that I do into the sock, I just hold the tail along with the working yarn, and honestly I do it for a couple stitches. Sometimes I do it for the whole thing. It kind of just depends on my mood. This particular cast on cuff uses a 1x1 twisted, half twisted rib. And so that's what I'm working here. It's a little bit more fiddly when you're just doing the DPNs and you're using 2 strands at once like I am. And you don't have to use 2 strands at once. You can just leave the tail down and weave it in later. But to be honest, weaving in ends is like one of my least favorite things in the entire world. So we just don't do that. And now here, to spare you a little bit, I jumped ahead and now I'm to the very end of that second strand. So it's a little bit more fiddly. And basically I just kind of wanted to show you that like once you get to a certain point, you just kind of do your last stitch with the 2 strands held together, and then just ignore trying to hold that last little tail end, and just go to working with 1 strand. Later on, when you're completely done with the sock and you flip it inside out to weave in the toe, you can go through and clean up all those little teeny tiny bits of leftover tails that are sticking out. For right now though, it's fine just hanging out there while you finish your round. And especially if you're new to DPNs, it can feel really fiddly at this point because all the different needles keep trying to jump into where they don't need to be. But just keep working with it and you'll get there. And I think, yep, we're just kind of finishing up the round. I jumped ahead a little bit further here as well, and you'll kind of see that throughout this video that just to spare you a little bit of time, I do tend to start the round and then jump to where I'm finishing up the round. So as you can see, there's the end of my first actual round of knitting in the 1x1 half twisted rib. And so now when we go back to work the second round, we're gonna make sure that we catch both strands for each stitch, because we really don't want to accidentally add extra stitches. So if you do it this way for weaving in your ends as you go, just be aware of that the first couple of rounds you're going to be focusing a little bit more on what you're doing and the speed might not quite be there, which, like I said, when the needles are kind of trying to jump all over the place because they don't have a whole lot supporting them these first couple rounds anyways, it's not really the time that you're going to be your fastest knitter. But look at that, like magic, the cuff is all done. It's amazing what happens in these videos, right? I really love how squishy this cuff knit up. Elaine Yarns has a really nice squishy fingering base that works out really, really well for socks. So here's my first gray that I'm using for these socks, and I'm just adding it in here. So you'll see I'm kind of just working the first stitch here with the gray, but I'm going to show you kind of how I weave in the color from the cuff as I go, because again, I dislike having to weave in all the things later, and since these have a lot of colors in them, I really wanted to avoid that. So we've got our next stitch that we're doing, and basically I've got the tail from the green is getting wrapped over the strand of gray on the back there. I'm going to show you a couple different ways here coming up how to do this. The method that I just showed you is my preferred way of doing it because of the way that I hold my needles and my yarn. It's most comfortable for me to work it that way. And then you just knit the next stitch normally. So see, I wrap it over the needle, I scoop up the working yarn, and then I slide the green tail off the needle so it's over the working yarn. And then you work the next stitch normally, and then you kind of wrap your yarn around again like that. And what this is doing is it's basically kind of just securing that tail behind the stitch that you're knitting. And then when you knit the second stitch just normally without securing the tail, it actually is the stitch that locks the tail in to that first wrap that we did. And as you go, you'll kind of get faster with this. The first few projects that I did with this technique, I kind of was like, what is even the point of this? This takes so long. But honestly, now I would rather do this than sitting and weaving it in afterwards, because I've gotten to where I can go pretty quickly with the weaving in ends. As I go like this, you do want to make sure that you're kind of spreading the stitches out a little bit on your needle, almost kind of like you do when you do color work, because since you're wrapping the tail around the needle, you can actually like really cinch up your tension and make it really, really tight on accident for those stitches. So just kind of be aware of that. And I just did the wraps to secure it on the first needle, and now I'm just knitting across the second needle like I normally would, without worrying about securing that tail. I'll just go back in and cut the extra off after the sock is done. And right now it'll just kind of hang out in there, and that's totally fine. Doing it across the one needle is a sufficient amount to keep it from unraveling as you wear your sock. Sometimes when I'm feeling like it, I'll just continue on until I run out of tail, basically. But you don't have to. You can just go for like 10 to 20 stitches. And even that might be a little excessive, but I would rather err on the side of having a few extra securing stitches than cutting it off too soon and having it unravel on me. So we're getting to the end of this first round of the new color, and for those of you that have the pattern, which you can get it over at yumiyarns.com or on Ravelry, again, it's the Traveler Socks by Yumi Yarns or Shayna Scott, me. I made sure that the color change rounds all have a knit round for the very first round, so that it's easier to do this method. And you'll see I picked up the gray tail on this last stitch, and I'm knitting it through, holding both the tail and the working yarn together so that it's, you know, again, a little bit thicker stitch there, but it does help kind of cinch up that very beginning stitch where we added the gray in. And here you'll see I dropped off the gray tail and did not continue to work them both at the same time, I believe. Oh no, I did. Just kidding. Don't listen to me. Clearly I know what I'm doing. Like I said, I kind of change up my methods depending on my mood. Sometimes I knit them both together like this, and sometimes, even though they're the same color, I'll do the wrap and do kind of the hidden weaving in like I did when I had the contrasting color. Definitely if I have a contrasting color and I'm not wanting to model it, I will do the wraps on the back side to make sure that it's woven in but you can't see it. But here I'm just showing you kind of how I finished off that tail of that gray. probably didn't need to quite go this far. I probably could have just finished it at the end of the first needle and called it good, but you know, sometimes you just kind of keep going. So now we go back to working our stitches normally. Oh, I know why I didn't. This is a central double decrease here that I'm doing that I wanted to show you. So you slip the 2 stitches, knit 1, and then you slip the 2 stitches off the right needle. So you just decreased 2 stitches there. That's why I was carrying the tail along the whole time, because I had patterning on this row. You can do that wrap behind the stitches for weaving in the ends on patterning. It's just a lot more of a pain in the neck. So if you can avoid it, go for it. And here, magically, this whole color is done now. So now we're ready for a color change to the next shade of green, which is this really pretty kind of medium green. And you'll notice that I'm holding the green to the front, like the tail, and that's because this first stitch is twisted. And as we go along here, you'll kind of see how we adjust things. I didn't end up doing the wrap on this one because the gray actually is not broken yet, because there's basically, in the color change between the sections, there's the gray patterning section, and then there's a purl row of and that first stitch was a purl, not a twisted stitch, I'm sorry. So there's a section of patterning in the first color, and then there's a second color that's done in a purl row, and then you do another row in the first color, and then you do patterning in the second color. So there's your purl row, but that's why the gray hasn't been broken or woven in or anything yet. So kind of going through, this is the last couple stitches on that round, just to show you how I kind of handle the color changes at this point and adding the tail in. So there's our tail that we had kept to the front. I'm just kind of cinching it up between the 2 stitches a bit, which it can be a little bit fiddly on these color changes, but doing it, taking the time to kind of do it this way saves you a lot of time in weaving in ends later, because there's a lot of color changes in these socks. But you'll see I just used both strands to knit that last stitch. And it looks a little loose and kind of sloppy there. That's okay. Just pull the individual strands that you need to kind of cinch it up. So you'll want to pull that green tail, and then you'll also probably want to pull that gray strand as well to kind of tighten that up a bit. And that's what I'm doing there. So it kind of cleans everything up and gets everything sitting the way that you need it to. So then this next round, we're going to work with the gray, which we're going to make sure we cross over top of the green. See how I did that so that you don't have any holes in your sock and the colors kind of twist around each other on the back of the work. That'll keep it nice and smooth looking for your color change at the beginning of the rounds. And again, I'm just kind of fiddling and tightening things and getting it to where the tension at the joint is how I want it. And then here, this is the tail of the green. You can see I'm doing that wrap on the back side method to weave in the green tail on this round here, because again, the way I wrote the pattern, because I wanted these color changes, but I also didn't want it to be a giant pain in the neck. Which to some of you who haven't done this method, you might be looking at this and being like, this is awful, I don't want to do this. I promise it does like become a habit and you get into the rhythm of it. And this is actually like one of my favorite pairs of socks that I've made in a while, just because it's a little bit of something each round to kind of change things up, but the patterning itself is super easy, and once you see what you're doing, you kind of just get into a rhythm with it and you can just go. Also, this is a really great way to use up stash, just saying. Each of the mini skeins that I used were 90 yards, so I think that's a 20-gram mini skein, and that made an adult pair of socks, and I've got big feet, so like I wear a US size 10 and they fit me just fine, and I had leftovers, so just in case you're worried about that. But yeah, so I'm just showing you here a couple ways. This is another way you can do it. Instead of doing that wraparound thing, you just literally take and twist the tail around the working yarn. So it's just laid over top of it like that. I think that this is similar to Stephen West's Weavin' Steven, but I've been doing this for a long time. So I kind of watched that video and was like, oh, that's similar to what I do. So if you want to check his out, that's another method of doing kind of the same technique. But yeah, it's basically a nice, easy way of getting all your ends woven in without having the headache of weaving them in after the fact. You can just flip your socks inside out, finish your last little tail on your toe with a needle, and then clip all the extra strands off, put your socks on, and you're done. And look, by magic, we're back at the end of the round. So this is the last couple of stitches with our gray. So I just wanted to show you guys how I finished off this round to get ready for the next round with the green. Because I know my testers had mentioned that all the color changes and stripes were a little bit confusing for what to do with all the tails. So this is the point that I break the gray. Once the little single round with the gray is done, that's where I break it. You don't have to break your yarn if there's only like one or two strands or rows between the stripes. You can just carry it up the inside of the sock and you'll be all set. So again, I'm making sure that I wrap that gray yarn over top of the green, and I kind of just cinched up the green a bit to make sure that I don't have a gap at the beginning of round. And now we're just going to continue with this round. It's another purl round, so I'm actually not doing the weaving in on this round. The main reason for that is, even though there is a fiddly way to do that weaving in of ends on purl stitches, it's kind of a pain. And this is much easier because the very next round is a knit round. So this first round here in the patterning section with the green, I'm just going through and knitting the pattern, and then the next round is where I'm actually going to work in that weaving behind on the back side of the gray tail. So that'll be all woven in too, and we won't have to worry about it. But yeah, so we are getting there with this sock. And hopefully this is helpful to you guys and kind of inspiring. Even if you're not interested in knitting this exact pattern, hopefully you're kind of picking up some tips for some other projects that you might work on, because I use this technique for all sorts of things, pretty much everything that involves possibly weaving in ends. So there's the last couple of stitches on that round, and again, it's kind of loose at the very beginning of the round, so you just want to take that gray tail and kind of pull it up and cinch it and tighten it up a bit, because that gray stitch down there is a little bit loose, but it's, you know, an easy fix. And so see, here's where I was talking about, this is the part that I do the weaving in on, and then you skip that next stitch and just knit it normally, and then you wrap your yarn on this stitch. So here's stitch 1 with the wrap, then stitch 2, we just knit normally. Nice and easy. Like I said, you get the hang of it, and the more you do it, the quicker you get. And I know some people do just like weaving in ends at the end. If you do, that's amazing, and I hope you enjoy all the ends that you'll have with these socks. But if you're like me and you don't really, this is a nice little skill to have. Yeah. And for the leg of the sock, I'm just gonna kind of keep following the pattern till it's the length that I want. In the pattern, I have written kind of where you'll want to stop for your heel, depending on what size sock you're making and how long you want the leg. So it's really easy to customize because I actually have the heel depth written into the pattern. And then I'm just going to kind of keep working along in pattern here. There you see our nice little purl ridges and our pattern. And as you can see, it ends up with a little bit of a chevron thing going on there, and each row or each section has a different color alternating between grays and greens, and it was really fun. I hope you have a great day and that you enjoyed this. We'll be back, well, I'll be back with part 2 where we'll pick up at the heel and keep going from there. I don't know if we'll get all the way through the toe in the next video, but we will see what we can do. Again, if you want to pick up a copy of the pattern, it's the Traveler Socks by Shayna Scott, and it's available at yumiyarns.com and on Ravelry. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe and all the things. And if you like this style of video, leave me a message in the comments and I can go through as I'm making other projects and do kind of these knit along videos where I give you little tips along the way as we knit through the project. I hope you have a great day and happy knitting!